The village of Ipetu was known for its music. Every evening, the sound of drums filled the air, calling people to dance under the moonlight. But none of the drums were as famous as the Oja Drum, a sacred talking drum said to carry the voices of the ancestors. Io, a skilled drummer, had once been the pride of the village. His hands could summon melodies that made even the coldest heart sway. He was married to Halima, a kind and beautiful woman who had stood by him through every hardship. But Io was not satisfied. One evening, while playing at the palace, he caught the eye of Adesewa, the wealthy daughter of the chief. Her skin glowed like fresh palm oil, and her jewelry sparkled under the torchlight. She smiled at him, and in that moment, Io forgot everything: his home, his wife, his vows. Adesewa leaned closer, whispering, "A man like you deserves more than a poor woman like Halima. Be with me, and you will never know suffering again." Io's heart pounded. He had struggled for years, playing at village gatherings for little pay. Adesewa's words were sweet, like honey dripping from her lips. That night, Io returned home to Halima, but his mind was elsewhere. He barely touched his food, barely looked at her. Halima noticed. "Io, is something wrong?" He forced a smile. "No, my love. Just tired." But Halima knew her husband. She knew when his heart was troubled. And deep inside, she feared that something was about to change. And she was right. Io had made his choice. By the next moon, he would abandon Halima and chase a future of wealth. But what he did not know was that the gods were watching. And the Oja Drum would not remain silent. The morning sun rose gently over Ipetu, casting golden light over the village huts. But inside Halima's home, there was no warmth. She sat by the fire, watching the yam boil, but her heart was heavy. Io had been distant for weeks. He left early and returned late, his excuses shallow and his touch colder than the Harmattan breeze. Then, one evening, he did not return at all. Halima waited, her fingers gripping the edge of her wrapper. The village was silent, save for the distant beat of the Oja Drum, played by another drummer at the palace. The drum's deep voice echoed through the night. But tonight, something was different. As the rhythm changed, it seemed to speak. The villagers murmured in confusion, listening closely. The elders, seated outside their huts, frowned. The drum was talking. Io has betrayed his home. Io has betrayed his love. Io lies beneath the chief's daughter's roof. Gasps spread through the crowd like wildfire. The people turned to one another, whispering. Halima's heart stopped. The drum was calling her husband's name. She rose slowly, her legs weak beneath her. No, it cannot be. But deep down, she knew them. The next morning, Io returned to the village with his chest high. He had spent the night in Adesewa's chambers, his mind filled with promises of wealth. But as he stepped into the marketplace, the whispers began. Io, the unfaithful one. The drum spoke his name. He betrayed Halima. The shame hit him like a thunderclap. He turned, looking for an escape, but everywhere he went, the villagers' eyes followed. Then, he saw her. Halima stood at the entrance of their home, her face unreadable. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply watched him, as if she no longer recognized the man before her. The Oja Drum had spoken the truth. And now, the whole village knew. Io had never known fear like this. He had faced angry chiefs, fought in village disputes, and even hunted wild animals in the forest, but nothing compared to the weight of the villagers' eyes on him. Shame crawled over his skin like fire ants. He rushed home, hoping to explain, to beg Halima's forgiveness. But when he reached their hut, the door was shut. Halima had locked him out. Io banged on the wooden door. "Halima, please. Let me explain." Silence. Then, from inside, her voice, calm but firm. "The drum has already spoken. What else is there to say?" Io's hands dropped to his sides. He turned around and found the villagers still watching him. Some whispered, some shook their heads in disappointment. The Oja Drum had cursed him. That night, Io could not sleep. The drum's voice haunted him, echoing in his mind. He went to the elders' hut before dawn, kneeling before them. "Please, wise ones, tell me how to undo this shame." The eldest, Baba Ifa, stroked his white beard. The Oja Drum does not lie. When it speaks, it carries the voice of the ancestors. You have been judged. Another elder sighed. You abandoned your wife for greed. The spirits have punished you with public disgrace. Only one person can decide your fate now. Io looked up, desperate. Who? Baba Ifa's wrinkled hand pointed to the east, toward Halima's hut. The woman you betrayed. Halima's choice. For the first time in his life, Io felt powerless. He had always been the great drummer, the man who could make people dance. But now, the whole village waited for one thing, Halima's decision. Would she forgive him? Or would she let him suffer? At dawn, Halima finally stepped out of the hut. Her eyes were steady as she looked at Io, who knelt before her. The villagers gathered, waiting for her to speak. Io's voice cracked. Halima. I was a fool. I let greed blind me. I beg you, please, forgive me. The village held its breath. Halima stepped closer. For a moment, it seemed she would reach out to him. Then, she spoke. You chose another over me. Now, I choose myself. Io's heart shattered. Halima turned to the elders. Let the ancestors decide his punishment. I have nothing more to say. With that, she walked away, leaving Io to face his fate. The villagers whispered. The elders nodded. The Oja Drum had spoken. And Io's curse had only just begun. Io's body felt heavy with shame as he sat before the elders, awaiting their judgment. The village square was silent, save for the crackling of the fire in the center. The Oja Drum rested beside Baba Ifa, its carved surface glowing under the moonlight. The ancestors have seen your deeds, Baba Ifa said. You abandoned your wife for wealth. You were blinded by greed. And now, the spirits demand justice. Io swallowed hard. He had never truly believed in curses, until now. The Oja Drum had revealed his secrets, and there was no escaping the truth. What must I do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The second elder, Mama Oak, narrowed her eyes. You must live as the drum has spoken. Every lie you tell, every deceitful thought, the Oja Drum will expose it for all to hear. Gasps spread through the crowd. Io's mouth went dry. No, please. Not this. But Baba Ifa nodded. This is your punishment. The truth will follow you wherever you go. Only when you have truly changed, only when you have been humbled, will the drum be silent. Io's heart pounded. How could he live like this? Every mistake, every false word, spoken aloud for the whole village to hear. The curse had been sealed. The drum speaks again. Io tried to carry on as before, but it was impossible. The very next day, he tried to buy yam from the market woman. This yam is fresh, I swear it, he said, forcing a smile. The Oja Drum rumbled in the distance. Io lies. He seeks to cheat. The yam is rotten beneath the skin. The market woman gasped. She broke open the yam, and indeed, the inside was spoiled. The crowd muttered. Io's face burned with humiliation. It happened again when he tried to ask a young woman for water. Please, I am thirsty, he said. I have not eaten all day. The drum thumped. Io lies. He has eaten bread from the palace gates. The young woman recoiled, stepping back. No one trusted him anymore. No one wanted him near. Io could not run from the truth. The Oja Drum had become his shadow, revealing every dishonesty, every deception. He had lost his honor. And worst of all, he had lost Halima. Days turned to weeks. Io no longer had a home. He slept near the river, shunned by the villagers. For the first time, he saw himself for who he truly was, a selfish man who had thrown away the only person who truly loved him. One evening, he stood before Halima's hut, but he did not knock. Instead, he whispered, I am sorry. He turned to leave, but a voice stopped him. You seek forgiveness? Io turned. Baba Ifa stood behind him, his wise eyes unreadable. Io nodded. I do. But I do not deserve it. The elder nodded. Then perhaps, you are ready. Io frowned. Ready for what? But Baba Ifa only smiled. The drum will know. Io woke before dawn, restless and weary. He had spent weeks as an outcast, with the Oja drum exposing his every fault. But Baba Ife's words echoed in his mind, the drum will know. Could he truly be forgiven? He didn't know, but he had to try. Io made his way to the elders' hut, kneeling before them. Tell me what I must do, he said. How can I silence the drum? Baba Ife studied him carefully. You cannot silence the drum with words. You must prove your change through action. Io's brows furrowed. How? Mama Oak, the oldest woman in the village, spoke next. You were once a man of great skill, Io. But instead of using your gift to uplift, you used it for selfish gain. If you wish to break the curse, you must serve the people you betrayed. Io lowered his head, understanding what must be done. It was time to rebuild what he had destroyed. That very day, Io went to the river, where the women struggled to fetch water. He carried their pots without being asked. He visited the farmers, offering his hands to till the soil. He played his drum, not for kings or coins, but for the children, teaching them the rhythms of their ancestors. The villagers watched with caution at first. But over time, their whispers softened. Even Halima, who had once refused to meet his eyes, saw the change. Still, the Oja drum remained watchful. One evening, as Io returned from the farms, a merchant approached him. Io, I have heard of your misfortune, he said. I am in need of a drummer at my feast. Play for me, and I will reward you handsomely. Io's heart pounded. He needed food. He needed shelter. The offer was tempting. But deep inside, he knew, if he played for riches again, he would betray all the progress he had made. He shook his head. I no longer play for gold. I play only for the people. A gust of wind swept through the village. The trees swayed. And then, for the first time in weeks, the Oja drum was silent. That night, Io returned to the elders. Baba Ife smiled. The drum no longer speaks, Io. You have been freed. Io exhaled, relief washing over him. But there was still one person he had to face. Halima. The next morning, he found her by the river, washing clothes. He stood a few feet away, hesitant. Halima. She turned, her eyes calm. I cannot undo the past, Io said softly. I hurt you. I let greed blind me. I do not expect your love, or even your friendship, but I ask for your forgiveness. Halima studied him for a long moment. Then, she let out a deep breath. The man I once knew was foolish, selfish, and proud. Io lowered his gaze. I was. But the man before me now has changed. His heart pounded. Does that mean? She held up a hand, stopping him. Io, I forgave you long ago. But forgiveness does not mean things can return to what they were. Io nodded, accepting her words. He had lost her love, but he had earned something just as valuable, her respect. And for the first time in his life, he was at peace. Years passed, and Io became a respected figure in the village once more, not as a man of wealth, but as a man of wisdom. He trained young drummers, teaching them that music was not for greed but for the soul. As for Halima, she lived her life on her own terms, knowing that she had made the right choice. And though the Oja drum never spoke of Io's lies again, its rhythm still echoed in the village, reminding all who heard it that the truth will always find its voice. The end.